I used to assume that butter basting is a core technique. Then I went into the test kitchen to explore how it works, and I realized that for home cooks, there's one situation where it's critical for success, and the rest of the time, it's fun, it's showy, but it's not required. Let me show you what I do instead of basting, and also that one time where I do still baste. You've probably seen chefs basting a ribeye, but all sorts of things can be basted. Scallops, lamb chops, even cauliflower steaks. When I was a line cook, I learned how to baste working a fish station, and I'd occasionally use it to speed up sunny side up eggs too. It's a nice way to deliver heat to the top of something that would otherwise just cook from the bottom up. Here's how it typically goes. Pop whatever you're cooking into a hot skillet and sear until you get good color on the presentation side. Chuck in some butter and aromatics, and make sure that the aromatics are at the top of the skillet, the food to be basted is in the middle, and leave some empty space at the bottom. When the butter's mostly melted, you can start basting. Tilt the pan towards yourself and spoon that butter over the food. How long you baste depends on how much butter you add, what you're cooking, and how good the sear was before the butter went in. Ideally, you're done basting when the milk solids are toasty but not burnt and the food is ready to come out of the pan. When you do it right, basting does a couple of things. It improves the sear, flavors the surface of the food with the aromatics, and it speeds up cooking by maybe a minute or two. Also, basting looks cool and the kitchen smells fantastic when you're doing it. That's the pros to basting. The cons? The butter and aromatics used for basting are discarded. It really only works well if you've got a gas stove. It's messy, and if you're not careful, some of those splatters of butter, they're gonna land on your hands or arms. So here are the questions. How bothered are you if dinner takes an extra 90 seconds to make? How much work do you want to do to take the sear from excellent to perfect? Would you notice that a steak had picked up an extra whiff of garlic and thyme? When I was a line cook, 90 seconds was a lifetime, but these days, I'm not sweating 2 minutes. Nor am I going to throw out perfectly good butter when I can easily turn it into a sauce that brings more than a whiff of thyme and garlic. That's why I believe basting just isn't one of those techniques that every home cook needs to master. So let's take a look at some recipes that came about while my colleagues and I were investigating basting. Matthew Fairman set out to develop a steak recipe that teaches basting, but he came to the conclusion that basting just wasn't necessary for a great steak. So he pivoted, and here's where he landed. I've got 2 ribeyes here that I seasoned yesterday. You could get away with seasoning just an hour in advance if you want. I just want to pat them dry and then get some pepper on here. Okay, so I've got a skillet. It's been heating for about 5 minutes over medium-high heat, nice and hot. I just want to get some oil in here and then we'll get the steaks in. Now, just like when we cold sear, I'm going to flip these steaks every 2 minutes. That'll help them cook through more evenly. Now, if I were basting these steaks, I would probably start when they were, had good color on them, better than this, but I would want them to be about 75% done. If I were to get the butter in too much sooner, then it would be black by the time the steaks hit 125 degrees. If I added it later, I'd have time to baste maybe 3 or 4 times before the steaks had to get out of the pan. That's just not enough time to improve the browning or for the flavors of the aromatics to really release. All right, time to flip. So when you baste, you tilt the skillet, and that obviously moves it away from the burner. This means that the part of the steak that's resting on the skillet, it's not going to cook quite as aggressively as before. Just as obviously, the top of the steak sees more heat because you're dousing it with sizzling hot butter. The overall effect is the steak cooks a little more gently and evenly for the final few minutes of cooking. That's nice because it reduces the chances of overcooking the steak. But tilting a skillet that's got a couple of pounds of steak in it and then basting for a couple of minutes, It's not as fun as it looks. You could just let the steak hit 115, 120 degrees, pull it from the heat, and let carryover cooking take it the rest of the way. So to finish this, we're going to take that butter that would normally be used for basting, add it to the pan, and add the aromatics that we would typically use for basting. So we've got some shallot, garlic, thyme, and rosemary. I'm just looking for the butter to brown and the aromatics to pick up a little color. It only takes a couple of minutes. This is looking and smelling fantastic. Let's get this onto the steaks. These have a little bit more cooking to go, so I'm going to put this foil back on top. I'm going to let these steaks hang out under this foil with that sauce for 10 minutes. In that time, they're going to finish cooking, release their juices, and that's going to flavor that brown butter. Okay, it's been 10 minutes. Let's take a look. I'm going to get these guys out of here so I can slice them. You guys can't see this, but the crew is very excited. This sauce I'm going to put back in the skillet. We're serving it in the skillet because one, it looks better, but two, it's warm, and so it'll keep the steak and that buttery sauce nice and warm. All right, let's give these a slice. I've got a little flake salt here and some lemon zest. There's a lot of steak fat and butter in here, and so a little bit of vibrancy from zest is going to really give this some life. So you can find this full recipe on the ATK app or just use the link in the description below. Let's give this a taste. Oh, this is going to be so good. I can see those juices in there. So the sear on this steak is incredible. It got beautiful color, the cook is great, and it didn't take much work at all. The way that Matthew used the butter that was meant for basting was actually my inspiration for a skillet roasted chicken breast recipe. Let me show you what I mean. When I tasted Matthew's steaks, I was immediately struck by that sauce. Did you notice that it wasn't emulsified? Now, I'm guilty of telling you that pan sauces need to be emulsified, and in my defense, if you're going for that kind of French cuisine vibe, it does have to be emulsified. But there are plenty of delicious sauces out there that naturally separate, so let's lean into that with this chicken. I'm starting with split chicken breasts. That means that they come with the skin and bone, and to help them fit in the skillet, I'm going to do a little bit of trimming. Now, I want the bones and skin there because they're going to help protect the meat, but there's just too much on here right now. I'm going to use kitchen shears to just snip away this little bit of rib. There's not really much meat here, so you're not losing anything. We're going to be making a nice buttery sauce, so we don't want any of this extra fat just hanging out on here. I just want to leave enough skin on to protect the breast meat, and that's looking pretty good. Got one more to do. I really like kitchen shears for this. I used to do it with a knife, but it's just not necessary, and it just means you have to sharpen that blade more often because you're cutting through bone. Okay, great. Next up, we're going to season these breasts. And rather than just sprinkling salt right on top, I'm actually gonna pull the skin back a little bit. You've probably noticed that when we cook turkeys, we tend to pull the skin back so that the salt lands directly on the meat. And we do that because the skin slows the rate at which the salt gets in there and seasons the meat. Same deal with the chicken here. I'm not bothering to brine or salt these in advance. So I want to make sure that the salt doesn't have a barrier it has to get through in order to season this breast meat. So that looks good. And then we'll just throw a little salt on top. Great. The skin goes back in place. And last thing before we start cooking, I really do want to get rid of all the extra fat because the fat in this recipe is going to come from the butter. And if you look at a chicken breast, there's always a part that's a little bit darker, less translucent. That's the fat deposit. And I just want to kind of give those areas a couple of pricks with a paring knife. You could use a skewer if you wanted. You don't have to go very far. It just kind of helps the fat render a little bit better. So I just want to hit this with a little bit of cooking spray, and then we can move this to the skillet. So these are just going to go in this pan, skin side down. It's a cold start because that works great for this recipe. Okay, so now we can start cooking. I'm going to set this to medium high. I'm going to leave this alone while it cooks. It's going to take maybe 8 minutes for that skin to get this nice golden brown color. When you sear a chicken breast the traditional way, you heat maybe a tablespoon of oil in a skillet and you add the chicken when it starts to shimmer. You hear lots of sizzling and the oil starts to splatter. The reason it splatters is the chicken releases juices as it cooks, and the water in those juices, it heats up and turns to steam, and that steam just kind of explodes out of the pan. Droplets of oil are going to go along for that ride, and they land on the counter, on our hands, on the stove. By spraying oil onto the chicken, we're minimizing the amount of oil in the pan. So when the water from those juices turns to steam, there's just not much oil to be carried out of the skillet. Once that skin is browned, I'll pop this into a 325 oven and I'll let that chicken gently finish cooking. When the breasts reach 160, I'll pull them from the skillet and let them rest while I make the sauce. So now that this chicken's done, it can rest while we move on to the sauce. Pan sauces always start with a fond, and I'm going to cook this over medium heat until those juices evaporate. The proteins and fat that are still in this pan, they're going to cook down brown, and that's going to be the starting point for our sauce. This just takes a minute or two. It's starting to pop. That fond is nice and dark. Let's get the butter in. Along with the butter, I've got some smashed garlic, and I just want this butter to melt. Next up, I've got a little bit of orange zest and about 5 sprigs of thyme. I want to give this maybe 20-30 seconds. That's just enough time for the heat to pull the aromatic oils out of these herbs and that zest. Now we can go ahead and shut off the heat and stir in a little orange juice and the mustard. All the water in that juice kind of pulls that fond up without us having to do anything, which is really awesome. And you can see how the sauce has this really lovely, dark, rich color. So I only added half of my aromatics before because I wanted those flavors to infuse into the fat in the sauce. I'm going to go ahead and add some more to kind of double down on those flavors. So just more orange zest and more thyme. When you make a traditional pan sauce, you would take the time to finely cut all of these ingredients, and that speeds extraction. In order to use the ingredients as you would if you were basting, you just have to have more of them. And so that's why I've doubled up. If you were paying attention earlier when I was making that steak, Matthew called for a generous amount of shallot, garlic, thyme, and rosemary for the same reason. Okay, let's go slice this chicken. All right, let's give this a try. The cook on this chicken is so great. It's tender, it's juicy, and that sauce is really vibrant from that orange juice. It's got tons of chickeny flavor. It's really nice and rich, delicious, and so easy. If you want to give this a try, go ahead and look for the recipe on the America's Test Kitchen app or use the link below. So far, it sounds like there's no point to learning how to baste, right? Almost. There is one type of protein that really benefits from basting: flaky and delicate fish. This method comes courtesy of Steve Dunn, and it's great if you want a quick and easy way to sear cod, halibut, haddock, or something like red snapper. The thing about these fish is that while they're raw, they're pretty sturdy and you're not worried about them falling apart. But as we heat them, the fish starts to flake and it becomes really fragile. This is where basting comes in handy. It lets us improve browning and cook the fish gently from both sides without moving it. Before I start cooking, I want to pat the fish dry on all sides and season it well. Got a little salt. A little bit of pepper. Okay, so this fish is ready to cook. I just want to get my skillet hot. And I'm working over medium-high heat here. I've got about a tablespoon of oil. So before I start cooking, I want to look over the fish and decide which is the nicest looking side. That's the presentation side, and we want it to hit the pan first because 1, that side always gets the best color, and 2, we're only going to flip this fish once. Usually it's going to be the side where the skin was, and you can kind of see the little bits of white here. That's where the skin was. On the opposite side, it tends to be a little bit more translucent. So that's the side I want to hit the pan first. I'm going to turn it that way so that when I go to pick this up, I can put it down exactly as it should go. So I'm seeing wisps of smoke. I want to turn this down a little bit and go ahead and get the fish in. So I'm going to let this go. It's going to take about 4 to 5 minutes for that first side to pick up some nice color. I'm just looking for it to be golden brown. It doesn't have to be perfect because we can use the basting process to improve the color. So I know I said don't move it, but I'm going to show you something. You can kind of see how with this method, very little of the fish is actually cooked. It's just the stuff that's really up close to the pan. That's kind of why this method is great. We're gonna flip this fish while it's mostly raw, so there's very little chance of it like breaking in half, which you don't wanna see. You want this fish to be nice and pretty when it lands on the plate. This is actually looking pretty close. So I'm going to give these a flip. Even though the fish is sturdy and I'm not worried about it breaking while I'm flipping, I am worried about kind of just splatting the fish over and splattering oil everywhere. That's where a second spatula comes in really handy. You just want to use one to hold onto the fish so it's not scooting around. You slide the other one underneath. Kind of gently land it with the spatula that was on the top. At this point, I'm going to let this go just a little bit more, and then we're going to get our butter in. Steve's basting method is really smart. We're not going to baste the way a line cook bastes, and you're going to see why. So let's get this butter in there. And what I want to do is I want to scoot the fish a little bit forward towards the top so that I won't hit it with the spoon when I go to spoon up that butter. We'll tilt the skillet, and I'm going to baste for just 15 seconds. So now I'm going to leave this alone and let it sear for 30 seconds, and then I'll keep repeating that until the fish hits 130 degrees. The thing I love about this method is that it works on all cooktops. Traditional basting, it's great on gas because you're getting some radiant heat from that burner and those flames, but on electric or induction, there's like little to no radiant heat, and so lifting the skillet, it just cools things too much. You really can't baste for 2 minutes straight while you're using one of those cooktops. Now that these fish are at 130, I want to get the aromatics in, and I'll keep basting and resting until the fish comes up to 140. That's a little thyme and garlic, and I want to scoot these up so that they're out of the way. Once that fish hits 140 degrees, it has to get out of that pan. So I'm going to shut this off, grab my spat. And just like with that chicken and the steak, we're going to serve this butter rather than tossing it. Now, because this fish is so rich, it's really nice to serve it with a couple of lemon wedges. This smells fantastic. I'm going to take a little bite from this front corner. Look at how nice and flaky this fish is. The great thing about this method is the butter gets super browned, verges on black, but doesn't actually burn. And so you get this lovely, intense flavor. And then the fish just kind of melts in your mouth. It's tender, it's flaky, it's perfect. I really hope you give this or any of these recipes a try. You can find them on the America's Test Kitchen app. And after you try them, leave me a comment and let me know how it went.